Right, so let's have a little bit of fun today with a neat new tool. It's called a Stampin Brayer, and it's on page 125 of our annual catalogue, the May 24 to April 25. And this is a very handy tool for different forms of inking. So you can see it's quite a wide rubber base. It's actually, let's see, it's just under 5 inches wide. There is these handy little silver pieces here which are great for letting your brayer sit just slightly above your work, so if there's ink on it, it's not going to get on the surface. But when you're actually using it, you need to flip it over so those are pointing up to the top. So this is going to be a little tool that we play with and create a fun creation project with. Let's see what I put together. So I'm going to start with a piece of toffee cardstock, which is very similar to crumb cake in the Stampin' Up colours. This is close to my heart cardstock, so it is two-toned, and I'm going with the lighter side. So I'm just wanting to create a bit of texture to the background of this piece before I start creating with it. So I've gone for a slightly darker brown. This one is chocolate from the old Close to My Heart days, or similar to early espresso. So this is what I'm going to put on here. So to brayer up, I need to ink the brayer quite a lot before it is ready to use. So I just go back and forth over one patch at a time and just slowly move along. It does sound a bit clunky because it is something that has to be movable. Go all the way to the edges, so I know I've got quite a bit of colour and versatility on here. Right, so because I'm going to be doing a very large piece of cardstock, I'm going to have to go from one side to the other, and I do start off the page. Now having a glass mat is perfect for this because obviously we're going to have a little bit of mess. We can wipe it up and carry on. So let's just see how this works. So let's just go through, all the way through, back and forth. Now you will notice, and this is going to happen if you go directly to your project, that you start darker and get lighter. That is just generally going to happen. So what I tend to do is I do it all one way and then I turn it around and go back the other way a little bit. There are a few tricks to this, but it's a lot easier to do the tricks when you've got a smaller project, like a card base size, rather than a big scrapbook page. So this works for me. I'm just going to carry on inking it up, doing our little bit of a lines across, back and forth, blending it all together, and it's never going to be perfect. So this is not for those perfectionists in amongst you. This is more for adding texture, which is just such a fun technique. And so here I am doing my last one at the end. I've just missed out a bit and got the rest of the page done off camera. So you can see all that texture. Okay, so this actually at the moment being brown looks a little bit of an interesting mess, but it's going to come together. I'm going to flip this over, pop it so that it's on its little ledges so it doesn't create a mess. And then I just need to grab my wiping tool, which comes with the glass mat. It's lovely large cloth, and just very quickly go over here just to get rid of that excess ink. So that's the easy side of getting a little bit of colour using your brayer onto the background of your project. And I can, whoops, turn it over. I can just go over this a little bit too, just to clean off the brayer. So that's the first point with this project. Now I'm going to show you a bit of adding other textures, but I do want to show you something else with the brayer before I move on. So when you are doing brayering, it often works particularly well with an embossing folder. Now I've got this lovely embossing folder here. It's kind of got a bit of a brick pattern and a lot of sort of texture, because I'm trying to get texture on this project. So what you can do with your embossing folders is bring the brayer in for inking them up. Now we all know we can swipe on the top of our embossing folder. That gives a really solid image, but if we want it to be a bit lighter or a little bit more organic, we can do it with our brayer. So again, I'm just inking up, this time in a red. I'm using Scarlet, which is similar to Cherry Cobbler, and I'm just going to go back and forth over the embossing folder and just try and pick up as much as possible. Now you will notice I am using the side of the embossing folder that's got the Stampin' Up logo. That's because I do want that side, and I'll show you the difference in a minute, to be embossed. So now that I've got a little bit of ink on this, I'm going to take it over to my machine and do my embossing, and I'll show you how it comes out. Okay, so by running it through that first time by inking up the Stampin' Up folder at the front, it came looking like this. So this is on our cream cardstock, and you can see that it's filled in all the gaps and the raised part has stayed white. So this is quite a textured type of embossing folder, and it's not a uniform pattern, so it is a little bit harder to see what I'm doing. If I was to, instead of inking up the logo side, I ink up the other side, it's instead going to fill in all of those other elements, all the other bits, and show sort of the outline as what stands up. So instead of the background and leaving the outline white, it does the opposite. It does the outline only, which is such a cool effect. So these are different ways of using your brayers, but you can see it's actually quite a light red rather than the darker red of the ink itself. If I was to run it through and then put some ink on, so let's just go on the back side of this, and this time we brayer it up after we've embossed. Let's just have a little look at what you think of the difference. Okay, so it's going to pick up those bits that are standing out on the side, but it's definitely going to give it a lot darker effect. So instead of being that light soft look that it does if you put it on the embossing folder first, when you do it after, you're going to get the stronger colour coming through. So that's just something to look at. It's kind of a bit fun. If we do this one, the opposite side of this one, let's just ink this one up too. It's quite a lot of fun, this, just playing around with all the messy features. But you can see straight away, look at that. Isn't that lovely depths of colour coming through? And I can ombre it, or I can just try and keep it a little bit more consistent by how much pressure I put on each section. So again, that's it afterwards. That was it when it was going through the folder. So it is a stronger look if you do it afterwards. So that's just a couple of fun things you can do. You can either do a bit of just basic texture in the background, or you can get some really fun textures going with your embossing folders themselves. Let's carry on and create some projects with these bits and pieces. So I'm thinking a Christmas layout may work really well with all this textured backdrop. What I've actually got here though is I've discovered a brand new stamp that was just one that's been online, and it is called Of Art and Texture. And it's got so many different textured stamp sets in there, and by stamping first, second generation, you can get lots of different effects. So in this particular project, I'm just using a couple of the different textures, and it's looking just like a little bit more going on in those three spaces. As you can imagine, I'm really creating three different embellishment clusters. So now I've pulled in the golden greenery bundle. This has got a gorgeous leafy stamp sets. One's a little bit more spriggy-like, pine-like, and then we've got softer leaves on the others. So I'm just layering these in the backdrop as well, just for a little bit of interest and colour. So I'm using two tones of green to stamp the two separate stamps that overlap each other, and it just adds that nice little bit of interest to the sides in these different clusters. And once I've done that, just remember there's a tiny little berry stamp, and I do want to bring in a bit of red. So I go around with this berry in lots of different places just to see if I can add a bit of spot of colour. It's not quite enough colour though, so I do go back to that embossing folder, the exposed brick 3D embossing folder, and I decided to try my brayer out and see if I can get enough colour on it to transfer onto my project. So I'm just using our silicone mat, which is a great little tool for transferring images, and I place that over, but it's not quite strong enough. So what I do instead is go away and swipe the ink. So I'm showing you this a second time. I'm swiping the ink before putting on the silicone mat. When I place that over the space that I want a bit of colour, brayer it on, we get this really cool effect. So next up, I'm pulling out the dies that go with the golden greenery bundle, and just using a bit of scrap green, a deep green shade, I'm going to cut out a couple of foliage. It is really cool set. There's 4 dies in the set that are standalone. You do not need to stamp at all, and you get this lovely delicate foliage. Really love the shapes that are coming out with this. And then we've actually got paper that is designed to match with the other dies in the set. So I can cut out these vellum leaves from the vellum paper itself, just using the dies, and they are all ready to be used. Now there's also another bundle called Greetings of the Season, and I'm using the die cut set, which have got lots of different tags, to cut out a large tag for the title and then a smaller tag for another part of the title that I'm going to be putting on. So that's going to work great for my stamping. Now I'm just finding the lovely font script that says it's the most wonderful time of the year, and then also a lovely Christmas. Now I will add the year in when I decide what photos are going on this. So let's just layer it all up with that beautiful Seasons of Green and Gold paper. It's got lovely goldy shine to it as well, and all this beautiful vellum. So I'm just putting together a rather lovely easy spread with 2 photos on it, layering up those embossed pieces of cardstock and those little tags that I created, along with a few other bits of scraps that I cut out of the paper. You can see the larger tag, I have cut out a bell as well from the paper, and I've just done a little bit of sponging in the backdrop of the title so you can make it stand out. Tucking in all that little bit of foliage, and we're starting to get this page just come to life. When adding photos, I ended up making it into a 2-page spread for my son's album. So here's one more idea with the brayer. This time we are going to make a card, and we are just starting with a lighter colour in the backdrop, but just to give a nice sort of blend from the light to the dark. It's kind of like a sunset effect. So I start with my lightest shade. I'm now adding in a central shade, not going quite as far until the ink runs out a little bit. And then I'm just going to do the darkest shade at the top and try and blend the whole lot together. By doing this, I've created quite a neat effect, and I decided I would pull in the Spotlight on Nature stamp set because it has a lovely flower that goes really well just in a black inking image. Now on the base, I decided I did want to pull in a little bit of green, and because it is sort of sunset time, I'm going to add a little bit of black around the base as well, just to blend in a little bit of depth of colour behind it all. So this is going to go quite nicely with a black, I should say, photo mat, and then adding it on to the beautiful Seasons of Green and Gold paper in the backdrop, it just all comes together beautifully. So here's the finished card. Doesn't that sunset look pretty cool? So I went off and made a scrapbook page as well, using Taupery, Evergreen and Harbour as my ombre colours and the brayer. I am loving this effect from the brayer as it creates such a neat backdrop for our pages and our cards. Thanks for watching.